So, this idea of the love of many waxing cold or growing cold, it's a fascinating passage, and I don't know if everybody hearing me mention it really knows where it comes from, what's the context of it, and where is it found in the scripture. It is also in the book of Matthew, and it is chapter 24. And if you hear me say chapter 24 of Matthew, many of you might go, that's an end times passage. Well, yes, it is. There's a lot to tell us about what's going on and where we are in time. So what we're looking at as far as the chapter is concerned, the chapter begins by saying, by him giving an explanation. He's already said that it's going to come when everything that you see here is going to be completely wiped out, speaking of the temple. And so their question is, well, when's that going to take place? And so he begins to explain it. Now, I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's a parallel passage that has a lot of very similar information found in Luke 21. But it is different as far as audience is concerned, and we'll get to it when we compare 24 with what is in Luke. But as far as this is concerned, there's no question of the era of time that he's referring to, and I'll show you that. But the thing that he says, and why I figure it's just an important thing for us to look at now. Let me give the first caveat. First caveat is what is shown to us in the news is usually shown to us because there's an intent behind it, and as the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, kind of a thing. So as far as the media is concerned, they love something that really wraps the attention of people, and it's changed even in my lifetime. Of the things that they will focus on, the things that we see in media now are really, it's so agenda driven, even more so than any time I've ever seen before. But the things that we're seeing that people are doing one to another are things that I'm just not used to seeing. And in the magnitude, the frequency, and the kind of carelessness of it. And the one that comes to mind, and it's really something that's happened maybe a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, were people that were protesting in New York. And they were in the streets, and the police were there, and the police were being assaulted by groups of people throwing water on them, throwing things at them, right there face to face with them and staring them down, and just doing all kinds of things that back in the day would have got everyone arrested, and they would have been probably very aggressive in their retaliation. But in this case, they had been so emasculated that the powers that be had taken all of their ability from them, and now the police were being victimized, which emboldens the people to do the things that they do. Now there are times that we see things that are so unbelievably cruel and so violent and so angry, and the people that do the things are so unhinged. It's just kind of an interesting thing to look at when you're kind of noticing that these people there's something going on. So it's something interesting that my wife and I have noticed in the last few months, that at times we'll look at each other and go, what's going on? What is happening? And I'm sure maybe all of us have had that at some point or another, that we become almost accustomed to some things happening, but every once in a while you'll see something that's so shocking that you finally just go, what's happening here? So this is, to me, as I look at it, I expect that these things will be happening as we get closer to the Lord's return. I don't see a world getting better before his return. I see things getting worse. So when I look at a chapter like 24, I know what we're looking at as far as the text is concerned, because Jesus is answering their question. When are these things going to be? Now they're thinking he's talking in the very near future, but the things that he's discussing here and describing have never taken place historically, but we certainly see them in place now where they could. So let's look at this particular passage. It's found in verse 12 of Matthew 24. And it says, "And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold." So that's what gets quoted a lot. But what's the context of it? What's being spoken of here? Well, we know the answer that he's given, but he's saying about, well, let me tell you some of the things that will be happening as we get to those times. He says in verse 4, "Take heed that no one deceives you." That's his first warning. And why is that? Well, because many will come in my name, saying that I am the Christ, and they will deceive many. Now, that's something that's still future to our time, but we have them kind of coming onto the scene a bit more than we've had before. These people claiming to be something more than just normally human. And they've been crazy people all through time, but there's also the idea that they're teaching things, even if they might not be speaking, that they themselves are Christ. At least the conditioning is that these are people who say that they have authority that's well beyond normal people. So we see there's quite a bit of that, and that's happening more and more as we go in time. So he says, you're going to hear of wars and rumors of wars, and so see that you're not troubled. Why? For all these things must come to pass, but the end has not yet come. So that stuff has always been happening, but it does have to get to the point where you take notice of it, that it's different than the norm. So this idea of conflict and all the rest of it, it's just different than it's been at times past. And we've had 2 world wars and a number of very, very important other kinds of wars, but they weren't world wars. So that's been going on for more than 100 years of world wars and those kind of things. There have been very, very serious military things, but you just see that the entire world is just on edge, and anything could happen on any given day that things go really haywire. Well, as he goes on, in verse 8, he says, now all these things are just the beginning of sorrows. And he says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you. And the tribulation is not the tribulation, it's just tribulation. So like when Jesus says in chapter 16 of John, in this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. He's not talking about the tribulation. They will put you up to this place of tribulation. It's just speaking about the days in which they live. They will kill you, and you will be hated by all of the nations for my name's sake. So once again, this will be that Christians will be in a place where inordinately they will be hated more so than at other times. It's just going to be the case. Now, when I see what's happening in Nigeria, if you're not familiar with it, do some reading. You're finding Christians and churches being attacked, but Christians being killed by the thousands. And it's happening constantly. Being done by Muslims, it's being done by Boko Haram and people like that, the groups like that. Well, it says, and many will be offended, they will betray one another, and they will hate one another. Now, this starts talking about the condition of people's hearts. They're going to become vicious in inordinate ways, just different. It stands out. So then verse 11, then many false prophets will rise up and they will deceive many. Again, this is a lot easier to do today because of the proliferation of how information gets around. You can make something global and people can see whatever's happening in this part of the world, they can see it in the other part of the world instantaneously. So it does seem to be that people get really wound up much faster than they used to. And again, people become consumers of information and news, and it really has a very odd effect. Well, he ends up saying, because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. We see that in verse 12. It's what we're going to look at here. But he who endures to the end will be saved. Now, he's given this list of things, and he says, now this gospel of the kingdom, it will be preached into the whole world as a witness to all, and then the end will come. But he says this next. So if we're questioning the context and where this would fit historically, he says this, therefore, because of that, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Now, that phrase, the abomination of desolation, takes place twice in the book of Daniel, once in chapter 11, and I don't believe he's talking about the Antichrist. That's more a guy named Antiochus Epiphanes, and a Greek general. And so that was the one. But then there's someone who is distinctly different in the next chapter, the Antichrist, who creates the abomination of desolation. That's never taken place yet. But so that tells us when these things are taking place. So let's look very briefly at the things that are said here. Because again, if I look around the world today and I see the things that are taking place in our country and in other places, you just go, what is going on? It's amazing how fast these things are changing. I'm watching stuff that's happening in Europe and in England especially, and watching what's happening to just the normal citizens and the things that are being done to them and the rights that are stripped from them. Some of this is so absurd. It's like, how is this possible that these things are happening to the people who have been there for generations? Because they're afraid of another group of people that are new to the country. Really interesting. So here we get this little bit of information. Because lawlessness. Now, iniquity is another It's another word that other translations might use. But this lawlessness just simply means these are people who cannot be governed. They're ungovernable people. And I look at that and go, you know, it's in the last 10 years, let's just back up the clock. It's 2025 right now. If I backed up the clock to 2015 and I started to think about the riots that happened through Antifa and the stuff with BLM and all that stuff, 10 years ago, this would have been, wow, that's kind of weird. 20 years ago, it was unheard of. Now it's almost something that we're training people just to do this. They organize, they use social media to do so. They'll tell you where you're supposed to go. People are paid to do these things. The evidence is all over the place. But you need a particular type of heart to just go, yeah, fine, I'm in. What do I do? So there is a lawlessness, ungovernable people that we see, and we just have glimpses of it here in our own country. But that's got to be something that's not just because it's central to some particular cause. There just seems to be a change and a shift happening in people. And this idea that they cannot be governed. They don't care, they'll break laws. And we've always had lawbreakers, but the things that we're seeing are just different. The defiance that you see in people, but it's something that culturally we've been feeding it for 20 years. More than that, we've been feeding it since the 60s. But now this stuff has really started to, I believe personally, hit its stride. So lawlessness is going to be there in abundance. It's going to be on the increase. And so it's where we get the English word plethora. It's just, it's going to be everywhere. It's ubiquitous. You can't get away from it. It's everywhere that you see. Because it's going to be there in abundance, because it will abound, it says, the love of many will grow cold. And this love here is not phileo. It's not the brotherly kind of love. The word here is agape, which is really kind of an amazing thing when you think about that any kind of love that a person could have. And agape is really, it's more the intensity of the love, because men will love their darkness. In John, we read that in John 3:18 and 19. Their darkness is something that they love with agape love. It's agapeo because it's a verb. But they have that intense kind of a love for it. Well, in this case, the people who could possibly demonstrate that kind of love that's, I'll give anything or I'll do anything that love demands. And so God so loved the world. He loved with an intensity that whatever was necessary, he would do. And that meant sending his son. Well, in this case, the people that could even be capable of that kind of love, it's going to be something that is kind of snuffed out. And when you look at the Greek word on this, it's spelled out, it looks like psycho. And that just means that it's been cooled, and to the point where the person that does what they do, psychotic, there's no life to them anymore. They've grown so cold. They're just dead. They're numb. And so all these things put together, it's going to be that the day's coming that he's describing here when people will be so ungovernable. They will be so without law. They will violate it with such impunity that they just don't care. But because of that lawlessness being there in so much abundance, because it's everywhere, that you're going to see that people will not even be capable of loving to the extent that they would do something in a kind type of a way, that they would show that in a loving kind of way towards one another. Remember, he's already talked about they're going to do these things to you, and you're going to have all this friction and problems and trouble. And the reason why the people doing those things are to the point where they're past being governed. They've lost the ability. And so it says it's going to grow cold. It's going to have no life left to it. It's going to, there will be a cooling to it. So again, when I look at some of the things that still to me, though I'll never be surprised by how wicked a person could be, though it can be a shock to the system to see it, still we're actually seeing things now. It's like, man, this wasn't happening with this frequency, with this ferocity, and how it just seems to be all day, every day. I just don't remember seeing it like this before. There's something that's going on. Well, if that's the case, Jesus puts these kind of things happening as we're getting to the very last of the days. And these things, as he lays these out, they get there on the increase. There are things that are happening as we get closer to that time. So it's not like this has to happen in the tribulation. All this can be the run up to that, and it will certainly carry over into it, because he starts to talk about the abomination of desolation, which is halfway through the tribulation. So I just thought it was an interesting thing. I've always found that to be kind of a fascinating passage, but guaranteed, if I read that 30 years ago, I couldn't have possibly imagined what I'm seeing here 30 years later, because it's so much more, it's more prolific. You see it everywhere, and it's happening more and more day by day. The cruelty and the indifference towards life is mind-blowing. But again, we've been raised in a society for 50 years that has put no value on life on the secular side of things. And so life is not a sacred thing in so many places, and we've been drilling that into our kids' heads for years. And there's a whole lot of other things that are, I think, contributing factors that are for a different day. But when I read Jesus's words here, boy, they ring more true today than they have ever in my lifetime. So just thought that was an interesting one. Wanted to pass that along to you for your consideration. If you have any questions on any of what I've shared, please contact me through the ministry's website, oldpaththeology.net. And if you have any suggestions, things that you'd like to see addressed, we have some other things coming up here in the next few weeks that have been requested, and I'll mention those when we get to them. But there's a lot to be discussed. The church needs to be paying attention to the world around it. Things are changing rapidly.